Varnishing your artwork is very easy to do, and it's important because it protects your painting. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you my favorite way to varnish or clear coat your paintings. The first thing you're going to need, of course, is a varnish and then a tool to apply it. I prefer to spray my varnish because it gives a nice smooth finish, so you could use a spray gun or you could even use an airbrush with a larger nozzle size. My favorite varnish is a permanent varnish, and it's made by Liquitex. This comes in a variety of finishes from matte all the way up to high gloss. It's up to you to decide which finish you like the most, but I generally go with gloss because it gives higher contrast to the final painting and also gives deeper saturation in the colors. My favorite spray gun is a W400 by Iwata, and this is technically an LVLP spray gun, which stands for low volume, low pressure. But you don't need a high-end spray gun. You could use any kind you'd like. I used to use cheap ones for years and they worked exactly the same. For smaller works, these little HVLP touch-up guns work excellent. You could also pick up an inexpensive airbrush. Some of these cheaper ones work so great because the varnish is kind of thick and messy, so if you ruin it, it's not a big deal. And a final option is an airbrush that has a fan cap like this Iwata HPTH. All of these options work well because we're going to be spraying such a small amount of varnish on the painting in multiple coats. The first thing I like to do is buy a few containers at the dollar store, and these are great for mixing and storing the varnish. If you're using an airbrush or a smaller diameter spray gun, it's a good idea to run your varnish through a paint filter just to strain it out. I use a filter of 190 microns and then just pour the varnish through it. It takes a few minutes to fully filter out. So once this is done, I like to thin it out with about 10 to 15% of distilled water, just enough to help it flow through the spray gun a little bit better. It's a good practice to avoid getting air bubbles in your varnish, so use a paint mixer and stir it slowly rather than shaking it up. The viscosity should look something like this. It's almost like whole milk, and this will work perfect to spray through anything. I'm going to be using my LVLP spray gun, and I usually spray it around 15 to maybe 20 psi. Then I adjust the fan cap so that I have a vertical spray pattern. This way I could spray my painting left to right in multiple passes. For the first coat, I want to spray on a very thin layer of varnish. This is basically like an isolation coat. Once the gun is spraying, I dust on the varnish in such a low amount. We want to make sure we don't overdo this, so I overlap each coat about 30 to 40% and just lightly spray the varnish over the top of it. You want to make sure you don't flood this. This is nothing like painting a car or painting a piece of furniture with a spray gun. You want to add the smallest, thinnest amount of varnish for the first layer. Once this coat's dry, we're going to have a good isolation coat, and this will protect it for more layers of the varnish. Remember, this is nothing like spraying a car. You don't want to flood it with paint. If you do, you have a very high chance of activating the paint and it's going to start dripping and melting away. So just remember that the first coat is extremely light. After about 15 minutes of drying, I'm ready to apply my second coat. I usually like to flip my canvas upside down. This way I get an even coverage of the varnish. And here I just do the exact same thing, a light, even coat of varnish. I always varnish my paintings vertically. This is just a personal choice. You could do it any way you like, but what I like to do is lay them flat afterwards, because sometimes if by mistake I add too much varnish on top, I want to make sure that it doesn't drip down, so I lay it flat to prevent that. I usually like 3 coats of varnish, so here, after 15 minutes of drying from the second one, I do the same thing, and this one I usually spray on a little bit heavier than the other two. To apply a thicker coat, all I do is take the spray gun and hold it closer to the surface when I spray. This is going to put more varnish on the actual canvas. Now we want to let this dry overnight or 24 hours, and then we're finished. Now let's talk about why you should consider varnishing your paintings. Let's take a look at this incomplete portrait. So this was done with createx illustration colors on canvas, on very smooth canvas, and this has been drying for about 2 months. If I apply some plain water to the canvas and then rub it around with a paper towel, you can see that the paint starts to lift right off. Createx illustration colors and Com Art paints are fantastic to airbrush with because they allow you to manipulate the paint and remove it when you need it. The problem though is that in the long run, this is not a very durable finish, so it needs to either have a clear coat or a thin coat of varnish to protect it. Now if we take a look at our varnished painting, which has been drying for about 24 hours, and I apply some water to it and then use a paper towel to rub it around, you could see that the paint doesn't lift off at all because the surface is now impervious to water. So not only does varnish protect against dust and moisture in the air, you also get a layer of protection against UV light, which will prevent your pigments from fading over time. The varnish that I applied is a permanent varnish, which is technically a clear coat. In traditional painting or oil painting, a varnish is meant to be removable. If you'd like to add a varnish that's removable, you can. All you want to do is allow this to dry, this permanent varnish to dry for about a week, and then you could do the exact same process with the other types, the removable varnish. They have solvent inside of them, so you could apply them over any acrylic or oil paint. You're basically doing the exact same thing. The purpose of that is in years, maybe 50 years down the road, if a restorer wants to clean it up, that varnish could be removed right off with some solvent, and it takes all the dust out of it and gets the painting basically back to brand new. Me personally, I don't do this step anymore. I think a permanent varnish does a great job. Down below in the video description, I'll have a list of different varnishes you can use. I've used plenty over the years and they all work great. My favorite just tends to be liquitex. So I hope you enjoy this and I hope you learned something. Thanks so much for watching.